Chapter 4 Urtica, Smertica, Who Cares? The trail down the side of the canyon to the creek was steep and a lot more overgrown than it had been last fall. We'll never make it down there with all the stuff we're carrying, Scott said. Eric, how about putting our lunches in your pack? Sure, but don't squash my sandwiches. Eric turned around. Scott unbuckled the straps and stuffed their lunches in on top of Eric's. It was a tight fit. The top flap bulged. By squashing the lunches down just a little, Scott managed to get the straps buckled again. Now they each had a free hand. Scott started to go down, then remembered Raymond and Mom's warning. If anything happened to Raymond, she would say, you should have taken care of your little brother, Scott. He let Rusty and Kev and Eric go ahead of him and turned around. Raymond, craning his neck to see over the edge into the canyon, looked scared. Come on, it's easy, said Scott. Get ahead of me and grab onto something. You won't fall. Raymond pushed his glasses up on his nose and took a deep breath. He caught hold of a cedar bough for support and stepped down over the edge. Scott waited until the branch swung back into place and followed. The trail twisted around trees and curved through the bushes, over the roots of the old stump and on down to a steep, bare place. Rusty and Eric and Kev ran down over it to keep their balance and disappeared around the bend up ahead. But Raymond stopped. Go ahead, run. Scott gave him a nudge. If you try to walk, your feet will slide out from under you. Raymond backed up a step, then took off running. He made it down the steep place without falling, but instead of following the trail, he ran straight into the bushes. Are you all right? Scott raced after him, dropping the bucket. He pushed the brushes aside. Raymond was all tangled up in a jumble of fir boughs and wild blackberry vines. His glasses hung at a crazy angle from one ear. Are you hurt? Scott asked, untangling him from the prickly vines. Raymond looked okay, except for a few scratches on his face and arms. Scott helped him to his feet. I think so. Raymond straightened his glasses and took a couple of steps. Yes, I'm fine. He limped off down the trail. Scott snatched up the bucket and hurried after him. The kid had spunk. He hadn't whined or complained about the scratches. Maybe having Raymond along wasn't going to be so bad after all. Boy, this place has sure grown up since we were here last fall. Eric was saying when Scott and Raymond reached the floor of the canyon. You can't even see the creek from here now. The trail is over here somewhere. Rusty searched among the sallow brushes and alder and fir trees until he found the almost hidden trail that led to the creek. There were no broken branches or trampled weeds before Rusty walked through looking for the trail. It doesn't look like Tiger has been here yet, said Scott. I think we got here ahead of him. How did Tiger find out about this place anyway? Rusty asked, pushing back the drooping branches of a young fir and starting down the trail. He hasn't lived in Addison very long. He probably he's probably been out exploring, said Scott. This time he made Raymond get behind him in case they ran into any more trouble. The trail led through waist-high sallow brush and wound past fir, cedar, wild cherry, and alder trees as they worked their way closer to Moosewood Creek. This all gave way to tangled strands of thimbleberry and salmonberry bushes. Here and there, Devil's Club thrust up canes covered with fine needle-sharp thorns. Behind them, Raymond had his book out again, naming the plants off by their scientific names. Scott heard Kev say something to Raymond about poking along. And why didn't he put that dumb book away and hurry up? Scott pretended not to hear. Over to the left, Scott saw a small open space filled with tall, leafy green weeds. Beyond it, he caught a glimpse of sparkling water. Up ahead, Rusty was pushing his way past a willow thicket. It seemed like a waste of time to battle their way past all those branches when they could cut through the weeds. Hey, Rusty, let's go this way. It's shorter. Scott left the trail and headed for the weeds. Scott, wait, Raymond called. That's Urtica delicta. Urtica Smertica. Who cares? Scott mumbled as he waded into the weeds. He was tired of Raymond and tired of poking along. He just wanted to get Dad's mitt back, the sooner the better. But Scott, the common name is Scott's arms and hands began to tingle. Suddenly he knew the common name for the weeds, and with no help from Raymond. He was up to his armpits in stinging nettles. He raised his arms over his head, but it was already too late. The tingling, itchy feeling was going to last for hours. He turned and made his way back to the trail. They reached the creek a few minutes later. On the far side, the water ran still and deep, forming a pool shaded by overhanging bushes and trees. Above the pool, dozens of silver threads dangled and swayed from the branches and limbs like strands of a broken spider web. Raymond stared and pointed. What is that? Fish lines, said Rusty. They got caught in the branches when people tried to cast their lines into the pool to catch fish. Are there fish in there? Raymond bent down to and tried to peer into the dark water. Come on, you can look for fish after we get to the gravel bar. Scott started upstream, anxious to get to the crayfish hole. They followed him along the narrow bank and climbed over the end of a rotting log that dammed the creek, making a miniature waterfall. Scott heard something rustling in the bushes, but when he looked back, only Raymond and the others were behind him. They came to a marshy place carpeted with bright yellow buttercups and green and white skunk cabbage. Raymond stopped again. He looked down at the thick, black mud oozing up around his sneakers and beyond the buttercups to the gravel bar and that jutted out into the water of the creek like a tiny island. We'll sink in the mud if we go through here. Raymond backed up a few steps. We don't go through it, we go over it. Scott pointed to a fallen tree that bridged the marsh. Rusty and Kev had already scrambled up onto the bank, onto the trunk of the tree. Come on, it's easy. Scott climbed up and reached down to give Raymond a hand. Just stay close to me and do what I do. You won't fall off. Eric stopped to tie his shoe and tucked the roll of rabbit wire under his arm. By the time he started after them, Scott and Raymond were already halfway across. The tree began to sway under their weight as they got closer to Rusty and Kev. Raymond's eyes got big, but he kept inching his way along. He stepped carefully over the branch stubs that stuck up in all directions like porcupine quills. Treetop dropped lower. Raymond clutched Scott's arm. Rusty and Kev waited until they were all over solid ground. We'd better jump together, said Rusty. On the count of three, they all leaped. The tree bucked and swayed like a wild thing. Scott heard a loud splat. He turned to see Eric lying on his back among the buttercups. Eric, you okay? Kev yelled. Yeah, you can't get hurt falling in this glop. Eric struggled to sit up and shook the black mud from his hands. He waved his arms around his head. These mosquitoes are eating me alive. He rubbed his hands over his face and neck, smearing himself with mud. Kev doubled over with laughter. Now you look like the abominable mudman from the Black Swamp. Very funny. Eric heaved himself up, grabbed the rabbit wire, and swung it around his head to drive away the mosquitoes. Jerking his feet out of the mud, one slow step at a time, he headed toward the creek. While they were laughing and shouting encouragement, the swarm of mosquitoes found four new food sources. The boys forgot about Eric. They all turned and ran.